Welcome to tonight's shiur. Yud Beis Menachem Ov. Actually, my late father's Yom Holedus is born in Tofresh Pei Hey, 1925. So, right. So we have here some questions and some feedback. So let's go into things Allah Seder. So, first of all, someone asked me to clarify the background for Chabad having large tefillin, particularly Shul Rosh. So, first thing you have is, well, let's go to on the left of the screen where you have a Tosfos from Eruvin. How does tefillin get into Eruvin? Well, there is this discussion in the Gemara. What happens if someone is walking on the street and he sees some tefillin, which are on the roadside, about salvaging the tefillin, and the Gemara says, Bris says, Mokoin yesh beroish, there is space on the person's head, lahoniach sheroy lahoniach by shnei tefillin. That person's head got space for two tefillin shel Rosh, so you could really salvage two tefillin at the same time. There's a discussion whether you have to do that on Shabbos, but fine. I'm not going into the detail of the halacha. And that's what we have, this idea that there's space to have two tefillin on your head. So Tosfos starts talking about different sizes, and then he says, says the Reir about the Balei Tosfos, he found in a medrash that the size for the tefillin is the base etzbois, is 2 finger breadth, which means when we measure a finger, we mean the thumb and the thickness of the thumb, and that's generally assessed at about 2 centimeters. So when you hear people saying about the Chabad tefillin arba al arba, it really irritates me because it's nothing to do with 4x4. That might be good for a nice fancy car, but it's 4 by 4 centimeters because it's 2 by 2 finger breadth. Yeah. So the shiur, so it says Tosfos, he found in a medrash that the shiur of the tefillin is the size of 2 fingers, 2 finger breadths. And the semech lodor, support for this, that the tzitz, which there's a gold plate, which was worn by the Kohen Gadol on his forehead, so it measures 2 finger breadths, as it says in the Gemara Sukkah, and then it says in the Gemara Erkin that between the tzitz and the mitznefes, which is the turban, there's space for the tefillin. So the Kohen Gadol wears the tzitz, and then there's a hair, and then there's a turban, and then the hair, that gap, that was where he wore his tefillin. The Kohen Gadol, or for that matter the Kohanim Hadyotim, did not wear shalyad tefillin because that would be an interruption between the sleeve and their body, and it says al basoro, they should be wearing their uniforms on their flesh. So they didn't wear shalyad, but they did wear shel rosh. The Kohen Gadol wore shel rosh. I don't remember shel rosh about the Kohanim Hadyotim. It says there was a space between the head plate and the turban where the tefillin were visible. So Tosfos interestingly says that although we then generally say that the tefillin are on the forehead, but Tosfos learns no, actually the tzitz was worn on the hairline, above the hairline, and so there's the tzitz, and then there's the tzitz, which is 2 etzbois of hairline, and then there's the tefillin, which is another 2 etzbois of hairline, and then starts the mitznefes. So that's the way Tosfos learns. That's a basis for what the Gemara, the Bris says, that the space for 2 tefillin, one above the other, because the tzitz and the tefillin behind it would be each 2 etzbois. So that's where he's got this source of the tefillin being 2 fingers. This is also brought in Shulchan Aruch. So this is in Simin Lamed base. So where we have here that basically there's no set size how big the tefillin have to be. the titura should be at least etzba. Hagoinim omru that the bottom of the shalroi should be etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim. So never mind the titura, which is the base of the tefillin, but the actual boxes of the tefillin should be etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim. Now, I recall when I was in yeshiva in Benoit, that's over 40 years ago, there was the son of Reb Nissen, Reb Shalom Ber Abba Shalom, and he had somehow a very, very special tefillin, and the titura, which is like the ledge around the tefillin, was not more than 3 millimeters. It was a really very, very thin, difficult to make and difficult to maintain, but that was, he had a very muhuda pair of tefillin. And so there is this idea that this is where the difference between Chabad tefillin and others is whether the etzba'ayim is measured in the box itself, or is the etzba'ayim measured in the base. So what we saw already in the first part of this Eve, that everyone agrees that the base should be at least etzba'ayim, which is about 4 centimeters. But here the Alter Rebbe adds that actually the Geonim say that the box itself should be etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim. And that's where the difference, as I said, that's the difference. Other communities, they keep to having the etzba'ayim, that the base is etzba'ayim, which is 4 centimeters, and Chabad go, as the Alter Rebbe says here, habatim shel rosh. The actual boxes should be etzba'ayim, and the Pri Megadim also learns this way, that the measurement of etzba'ayim is actually in the bias itself. This is also, of course, many of us will remember, this is mentioned in Tanya. I think it's going to come up soon in the shiur Tanya, where it talks about mitzvahs having a measurement. The length of the tzitzis, 12, goydlin, 12 finger breadth, and the tefillin, etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim umrabois. So he mentions about the tefillin being a square, being etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim. So this is something which we are more particular than which other communities. And so that's where it comes the large tefillin. And this is just a letter of the Rebbe supporting this idea that the measurement of etzba'ayim is in the boxes, not just in the base. And he refers to the Pri Megadim who learns this way according to Rashi, etc. Let's go on to the next point. So here we have a shliach somewhere in Europe and has difficulty to source white eggs. And as we all are familiar, when you sometimes go on holidays and you buy some brown eggs, the incident of having a blood spot is much greater. And that's the simple reason because in the candling process, the shining of a light. So if it's a white shell, then the candling is more effective and they can see impurities. Whereas if it's a darker shell, so then the light doesn't penetrate, and so the impurities will escape the scrutiny of whoever's supervising. All right, so now, is there a shiur to, when you boil eggs, are you obliged to check those eggs? So let's read here. This is from Shulchan Aruch here today. Now, be careful. Don't look at Shulchan Aruch for the laws of eggs. Rather look in the halachas of blood. So there's 2 separate simonim. Look in the halachas of eggs, you'll talk about which eggs are permitted. Here it's not a question of eggs, it's a question of blood. So it writes here that the Shulchan Aruch writes, Mutar lechol beitzim tzluyos afal pi she'einom yecholos libodek. You are allowed to eat roasted, which is boiled eggs, even though it's not, I can't check them. V'chein ein litzorich, says Ramo, you don't have to check the eggs if there is blood, because you can rely on the majority of eggs which don't have blood. However, if you are making, let's say, an omelette where you're cracking the eggs and it's during daytime, so then you should check before making your omelette in case there's blood in it. So this is the background where we are noihig, that we do check eggs before making an omelette, before making a cake. Now what you have here on the left of the screen is from the Kaf HaChaim, and is bringing that the Arizal was not concerned so much about this chumrah, and just if you're making eggs in a frying pan, yes, but otherwise you're not really mechuyev to check boiled eggs. I was brought up that we did. My mother Shalom did check eggs, but that's, should we say, it's a lefnim yeshuras hadin. So I hope that answers the question. Let's go on to the next point. Okay, so here's the question. Chazan, there's a minyan, and Baruch Hashem, there's a bris happening that day, and so the Mohel is there, and the Mohel had to rush off. So they've said they didn't say Tachanun for the beginning of, right after Shmona Esrei, after Chazos Hashat. By the time it comes to Volat Zion, so the Mohel has had to leave. So here's the question: Do they have to say Lam Natseach, and do they have to say Tefilin David at before Shir Shel Yom? In other words, does the exemption of Tachanun, is it cut off because the Mohel's gone away, or does it continue till the end of daven? Now, you're not going to find this in Ashkenazi's forum, for the simple reason that the Ashkenazim don't skip Lam Natseach so fast. And as far as Tefilin David before Shir Shel Yom, Bichal Nusach Ashkenaz is not there. It's Shir Shel Yom, it said after Aleinu. So you'd have to find it in Sfardish's forum if you're lucky, but you wouldn't find it in Ashkenaz. And I looked around, I couldn't find anyone who comments on this. But let's see what we can find. So we have here Taz, and then we have Halochos Ketanos, which is a later sefer, probably about 300 years ago, and then we've got the Alter Rebbe. I'm not sure which way we're going to. But let's read it. Let's read the Halochos Ketanos. Shaila Chosn was in the Shul when the Tzibur were davening. When it came to Tachanun, he's gone. Do we go according to the beginning of davening? There was a Chosn there, or do we say that he's not here now, so we do have to say Tachanun? So this is different to our question. He's talking about that before they even started Tachanun, before they even started skipping Tachanun, he's gone already. We're talking when they did skip, but whether the skipping has to be aborted because the Mohel's gone on his way. In that sefer Halochos Ketanos, he refers to the Taz, which we'll read in a moment. Shuva nire mehapsokim uksovim. So the Psokim Uksovim is a section of the Trumas Hadeshen. And he says in the Trumas Hadeshen, in Siman Pei, he says that they used to have a minhag that the Chassanim would leave the Shul in order to enable the people to say Tachanun. So according to this, the Chassan is gone. They say you don't say you do say Tachanun. Then the writer, the author, asks the question. We have a rule that if you had a minyan and then one of the 10 left the shul, so you're allowed to finish off. If let's say by Chazoros Hashatz, you had 10 people and then one more person left, so then you could still say Kaddish Tiskabel, because as if it's kind of the minyan continues even though he's left. So he wants to say, just like you can continue, you can say Kaddish Tiskabel even though this man has left. So also you should be able to skip Tachanun because he was there at the beginning. Mashba de Bosa Haschola Gamrina. So he comes up with a svara that since at the outset there was the simcha of the chosn and the exemption of Tachanun, therefore that should continue even though he's left the room. Fine. That is the Halochos Ketanos, and others dispute the parallel over here. But let's leave that to one side. Let's take a look at the Taz, and then we'll look at the Alter Rebbe. Look at it carefully. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, I think so that I'm not sure the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, v'lo b'beis hachos. You don't say Tachanun in the house of a chosn. Ubozen nire Even if the chosen has left, you don't have to say Tachanun. Since he was there at the davening, and now even though the chosen's left, you don't have to say Tachanun. If one of the celebrants of the Bris were there, so then, and they left, you don't have to say Tachanun. Okay. Those are the words of the Taz. So there's a Shul, and there was a chosen there, and the chosen left, or the Baal Simcha, the Baal Bris left. Wait a minute. Yeah. Right. Let's read the Alter Rebbe. Even after people have left the Beis HaChosim and come home, they do not need to say Tachanun. The fee, and he says why? Because the spot for saying Tachanun is right after Shemoneh Esrei. Since the slot where Tachanun belongs was overruled, so to speak. So this is different, yeah. It's certainly that the chosen is there. It was there at the moment of Tachanun, and then they didn't say Tachanun because it was there. Then the chosen, the people left the Beis HaChosim. So it's like difference, yeah. Here, my impression is that he's talking about the chosen left the house, and here he's talking about when people left the house of the chosen. All right. Meanwhile, the Alter Rebbe says, so you were in a chosen's house, in a chosen's shul, and then you went home. You don't say Tachanun because at the given slot where Tachanun said you didn't say it with the reason, with justifications, you don't have to say later. What about V'hu? So he says also, since V'hu is said Nusach Ashkenaz before Nefilas Apayim, even though there's a chiyuv to say V'hu according to Minhag HaMinhag, so it's on a level of Minhag, and at the moment of the chiyuv they were exempted, which is the moment of chiyuv is right after Tfilas Yudches, right after Shemoneh Esrei. Therefore, they have an exemption for the rest of the day. So, on the surface, it looks like that the reason why you don't have to say Tachanun when you come home from a shul where there was a Baal Simcha is because at the moment when it was meant to be said, you couldn't say it, and therefore it's lost. Well, then, what about the other case where the chosen was there or the Mohel here in this case, he was there for Tachanun, and so therefore Tachanun was pushed away. But what about Lam Natseach and Tefillah David? They weren't pushed away because he wasn't there. So the reading from the Alter Rebbe, you should be saying it. That's the l'chayr of the impression. However, I'm just something was bothering me. The Alter Rebbe says you left the Beis HaChosim, whereas the Taz seems to be worse, presenting it more that the chosen has gone out. And I'm thinking the Alter Rebbe Dafka worded it that you left the house of the chosen, and therefore that's the question whether you should say Tachanun now. But if it was that you were in the chosen's house, the chosen was there, and the chosen has left, in other words, you were in Shul, again, if you left that premises, so then the exemption is only because Nidchamim came Kviyosei. But if you're still in the same premises where the Simcha was there, possibly then the Simcha remains in that place, and you wouldn't have to pick up later. I'm just reading from the way the Alter Rebbe presents it. Why does he say after they left and went home? Why didn't he present it if the chosen left the premises? So therefore, I'm suggesting if the chosen left the premises, the Simcha would remain, similar to what the Halocho is saying. If an individual leaves the premises, then let's say, all right, so to summarize, if someone was there at the Tachanun and didn't say Tachanun because there was a chosen, then he rushed out, not the chosen, and someone else, and now Balabos rushes out, and he's now in the middle of Asher Yavol. Does he say Lam Nasir? The answer is yes, because there's no reason, it's not Nidchim Mimkaimai, Mimkaim Kiviyosai, and nor is he in a place of Simcha. And therefore he should be saying it if he leaves the premises. Okay. There is generally a rule when there's a suffix, whether to say Tachanun or not, you take the lenient position, you don't say it. Let's move on. Right. Now, someone asks me the question. He's a shliach in a campus somewhere in the United States. He listens to the recordings, and so hopefully he'll hear this one too. And he does not have a minyan for Friday night. So in certainly the summer, so the question is, does he makabel Shabbos early? Perhaps he does have some students come for the meal, but they don't have a davening. He's got family, whatever. So he wants to be makabel Shabbos early, and then make Kiddush. And then after the meal, make Kiddush, have the meal, and after the meal is over, then to daven Maariv. So is that okay or not? So I told him it is okay, and I'm told that in Manchester, where you've got these extremely late Friday nights, so the Minchas Yitzchok Raskin was a Rov in Manchester, and that was what he did. That they were, I guess, not on his own, it was a minyan. They would be makabel Shabbos, I don't know, 7:30 something like that. Do Kabbalah Shabbos, and then they'd go home, make Kiddush, have the meal, and come back to daven Maariv. So I know that it's got a background to it, got backing to it. So he wrote this in Yeman. He wrote to me. He sends me a quote from the Kaf HaChaim in two places, in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph and Siman Ayin Reish Beis, I think, where the Kaf HaChaim says, according to Kabbalah, there's a certain sequence. There's a sequence of the Neshama Yisera coming, and it comes first at Kabbalah Shabbos, then it comes more at Shmoneh and Baruch Hu, and then whatever, and then it comes the more at Kiddush. If you're going to do Kiddush before Maariv, so then you're mixing up the Seder Hashpah. You got the Seder of the Seder Al Pi Kabbalah. All right, that might be that may be a valid point. What I did have a problem. So they say, according to this, perhaps he should daven Maariv early. Rather than leaving Maariv for late, he should daven Maariv early. So he should do Kiddush and then Maariv. Sorry, Maariv and then Kiddush, which is the normal sequence. My response to that is that davening Maariv early, the way it's presented in Shulchan Aruch and the Alter Rebbe and Simon Tzaddik Sifyud, says that davening Maariv early is only in order to be able to daven with a minyan. Davening Maariv early on your own is not so poshut. Okay, there is referring to a Shal Tzemach Tzedek, which talks about this, that about davening. That's a different discussion. Should you daven the Yechidus late, in other words, after nightfall, or daven with a tzibur early? Here he doesn't have a tzibur in any case. So his question is: should I daven Maariv early be Yechidus, or should I, and then I'll have the Seder Al Pi Kabbalah correct? Or should I daven Maariv late? The Seder Al Pi Kabbalah will not be perfect, but he won't be davening in Maariv. In other words, there's a whole business. The Ovid, Rabbi Yehuda Ovid, Rabbanan Ovid. There is a leeway. There is leeway to daven Maariv early from Plaga Mincha, but that's generally the advice is that's only in order to enable you to daven with a minyan. All right. Sometimes someone has health issues, and therefore one would be made to daven b'shas adchak. But really, davening Maariv early is a compromise, and therefore what I'm saying to this in Iran is, whichever way you're going to turn, you're going to have to compromise. If you daven Maariv early, it's a compromise. If you daven Maariv late, it's a compromise in the Kabbalah sequence. And as I say, you have certainly a precedent to be davening Maariv after Kiddush. It's not the ideal, but it may be the better of the two options. Let's move on. Yeah, actually, you mentioned about the Tzemach Tzedek. This Ingerman sent me a copy of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is quoted in the Sos HaShulchan of Chaim Noach quotes that Tzemach Tzedek. Let's move on. So here is the question. We have discussed this similarly about at the beginning of the year, actually Shabbos Bereishis possibly, about recharging a hearing aid. So the woman who asked me is part of a support group for children who have hearing problems, and they wear hearing aids. Now, there's something called a cochlear-implant, and apparently the procedure for putting those in is that they would actually, the procedure will destroy any natural hearing, and the implant takes over. But the implant only works with a battery, and that battery works for about 16 hours. So, and basically what that means is when it's not working, that hearing is totally lost. They hear nothing at all. So what can they do for Shabbos? Shabbos is usually more than 16 hours. So how can they manage to be able to hear for the rest of Shabbos? It's a switch it off honest, also not really same problem. So they ask, what about if they have a charger which is on a time switch? Does it help to put the appliance on the charger whilst it's off, and then later it'll go on? So there is a little bit of gain in that, because at the time when you put it on, there's nothing happening. Some will say that it makes no difference because it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to go on. Absolutely. In other words, 99.9% in this part of the world, Baruch Hashem, you very rarely have power cuts. So it's almost inevitable that it's going to go on at a later stage. So that does that mitigate it? A little bit does mitigate it. But my approach here is the following. The Alter Rebbe in Siman Shin Chav Ches has got quite a revolutionary Kiddush, and that is that you are allowed to do a melacha kilachayad for a choile she'ein bo sakon. So this is the Alter Rebbe's Kiddush. Others disagree, but according to Alter Rebbe, so he writes here, if a person is nofale mishkol, that's the left definition of a choile she'ein bo sakon, and is not functioning. So then you cannot do yourself a straight Isur D'Rabbanan. You are allowed to do an Isur D'Rabbanan in a unusual manner, Kil Achayad. Then the Alter Rebbe adds this point, which is very powerful. If you're doing it Kil Achayad, you'd even be allowed to do a Melocha Gemura. And the source is about a goineach, a person who's got some kind of problem, and his healing is to suck milk directly from a goat. So he's allowed to. Milking a goat is a melacha, but milking by sucking directly, that's not the normal way you milk goats. Not the weed milk. That's how baby goats milk with sucking. But we would normally milk into a bucket. So there you see that you have to do a melacha gemura in a shinui, in an unusual way. So on that basis, you're allowed to. This is something which I rely on the whole time, to advise people that if there is a case of a choile, and the needs of a choile, you're allowed to do even a melacha d'oraisa in an unusual way. My feeling is that a person who's unable to hear at all is no less needy than a choile kol gofay. There is a halacha that if a person if you make someone blind, so you have to give them compensation. If you make them a loss of other limbs, if you make this person deaf, you have to compensate as if you totally ruined the person. A person can't hear then they can't. They're not meant. They're not able to function normally at all. And therefore, I see that as Halocho Gufay. It's interesting, in the conversation with this mother, she said, is there any leeway to say that a chedesh is potem in mitzvahs? So therefore, the child, when the hearing aid is not working, they kind of switch off, become potem in mitzvahs. They're allowed to do what they want. So I said that I find difficult to accept. A person who is chronically deaf doesn't communicate. So then, unfortunately, doesn't communicate. Therefore, they don't relate to the world. And therefore, they're exempt from mitzvahs. But this boy, for 16 hours of the day, he's communicating normally. The fact that his hearing is switched off for a minute or for 10 minutes, for an hour, that doesn't make him, loss of contact with the world in the broader sense. So for the moment, yes, but I don't think that makes him potter from mitzvahs. Yeah, that's my feeling about it. It's not like I feel he still knows what's going on, etc. So therefore, I'm taking this view that being totally deaf is an illness. For this, you are allowed to do a malocha, even if it were derais. Certainly, I know if electricity is derais or not. We can argue about this. Probably not. So then again, that helps us. But to put those hearing aids, implants, whatever that is, to put it into the charger, kilachayad, and then to take it out after recharging to put it back on in their ear. So just in other words, just placing it in the charger, removing it from the charger, should it be done kalachayad, then they can put them into their ears or remove them from the ears just the normal way. That's the way I felt would be a fair psak. Okay, let's move on. So now the story here is that I'm making up the story to cover the details. He's gone off to France, and every year he goes to the same place in the Alps, and there's a local bakery, and the bakery makes just these French baguettes, which are just flour and water and a bit of salt. So the ingredients are okay. Now I must tell you, I said this word over Friday night, and Yosef Landa told me that regular commercial bread could have 100 different ingredients. He says the fact that you can see that commercial bread lasts longer than homemade bread, that's because they put in stuff. Perhaps we don't want to know what they put in, but so it's not so posh. So we're talking about this aspect of the halacha. Does the kashrus has to be looked in more carefully? Meanwhile, what happened here is he comes this year to the same village, and there's a new owner, and his name is, he happens to be a Jewish boy. Unfortunately, he's open Shabbos also. So now raise the question. Of course, I'm not going to buy the bread which he bakes on Shabbos. But someone raises the question, wait a minute, hang on a second. If bread is baked on Shabbos, it's forbidden. So then that makes the kalim forbidden. Therefore, even the bread which you buy on Sunday, baked on Sunday, is baked in the same equipment which was used for baking on Shabbos. Does that not make all the equipment osur? Had it be a goyish bakery, no problem, because he's allowed to. But here, because there was a violation of Shabbos, does that make the kalim osur? That was the question. So here we have the beginning of Siman Shin Yud Ches. And here it talks about the concept which is called an halacha maaseh Shabbos, the things which are made on Shabbos. So it starts off, one who cooks on Shabbos, or any other malacha, of the malachas, if he did so willfully, knowingly, he is not allowed to benefit from that ever. From let's say he cooked something, he made a cake on Shabbos, he is not allowed to eat that cake ever. Not only is the cake asur, but also the baking tin. in which the cake was sitting, or he made a cholent. So the cholent pot, which he made on Shabbos, so that pot is also osur, because the pot has absorbed the taste of the cholent, which was cooked with isur. Therefore, just like if you cook bishul akum, you cook chalav akum, so then it makes an isur on the kalim. So too here, the pot with which cooking was done on Shabbos, that pot is also not only the food. But then it says further, avola chedim muter av hatavshil v'motzoy Shabbos. But for other people, that same food is permitted. Never mind the pot. The food itself is permitted. So according to this, arguably, if I come Motzei Shabbos to that bakery, and there's a Jew who baked bread on Shabbos, he's not allowed to use it, but I would be allowed to use that bread, because for others it's mutter after Shabbos. There's also a poshet. We'll see some pullback on that later. Now that is in Hilchos Shabbos. In Hilchos Yomtov, the Alter Rebbe says if someone violated Yomtov and he wanted to make some more soup for next week and made 2 pots of soup, 2 pots of chicken soup, and they only needed one today, the other one was made for after Yom Tov. Well, that's a violation of Yom Tov. So he says, Harei macholim halolu osur loi l'chol anshe beisoi li'olam. So then there's a penalty. Not only is he not allowed to eat it after Yom Tov, but even his family are not allowed to eat it. So there seems to be a contradiction where, sorry, I didn't bring the full thing in. In Hilchos Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe says the family are allowed to partake of it. And in Hilchos Yom Tov, he says the family are not allowed to. In other words, for whom it was made. And here's the Tachanun, he talks about this. So there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction. Possibly you could say that in Hilchos Shabbos, which is more chomer, the Alter Rebbe was able to be makel because if people are not going to take advantage of it. In Hilchos Yom Tov, which is perceived as less chomer, therefore there's a need to be more machmer. Okay. But meanwhile, what we're seeing here is that in principle, you have the halacha that the bread baked by a yid on Shabbos is mutter after Shabbos for others. And certainly then, the kalim should be mutter. So I saw in one of the contemporary forum about a group of students, and they share a flat, and some of them are they've all agreed to keep kashrus, but some of them are Shomer Shabbos, some of them are not. So I saw I made a search somewhere on Google somewhere, and so the poskim was saying that there's a problem for the Shomer Shabbos students because the kalim have been used for cooking by the non-Shomer Shabbos students on Shabbos. But really, I don't see the problem because the Shomer Shabbos student is acherim, and for acherim it's mutter, so the kalim are mutter. Now, this is from Piskat Shuvah. Some people are recommending to be machmir, because there are poskim who are machmir, especially for the family. Okay. Then there's another important point here about the Ksav Sofer. He says that which the Mogen Avraham in Shiur Yud Ches says, that it's permitted for those for whom it was made. That's only if it's just a one-off situation. He did it willfully, but okay, we don't expect him to do it again, etc. But says the Ksav Sofer, if you have a restaurant who is regularly cooking on Shabbos for others, and that's his parnosa, certainly there should be a penalty for other people not to be allowed to benefit from it. Even though that may not discourage them from running their business on Shabbos. But we shouldn't be allowed to have benefit from that restaurant or that bakery after Shabbos. And therefore, he concludes that factories which are open on Shabbos, or hotels, etc., which are working on Shabbos as a weekday, one wouldn't be allowed to buy their products, which were produced through Chil Shabbos. Okay, so whilst we've seen in Shulchan Aruch it says la'achedim it's mutar, the Ksav Sofer is saying that for his customers, no. If that's his regular thing, he bakes stuff on Shabbos, you would not be allowed to buy that bread after Shabbos. Having said that, let's take a look in the notes here in 84. However, as far as the kalim goes, says a Ksav Sofer himself that you are allowed to, you don't have to kasher them. You don't have to worry. We're not talking about whether there's a worry about treifas, just talking about the Chil Shabbos. So even the Ksav Sofer, who's been saying that a commercial establishment which is open which is running on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to buy from them, but he also is allowing the kalim, that the kalim are mutar. And therefore, coming back to our question, we're not even talking about the product. We're talking about buying bread which is made on Sunday or Monday because of the kalim. So again, basically, la'achedim it's mutar. Then even if you take the chumrah because it's doing it for customers, etc., but the kalim is mutar. Let's move on. Mendel, you're pointing out that the Alter Rebbe in Yomtov says that point in the Hakutas Achron, especially since there was a Maariv. It seems to be, even if it wasn't that aspect, it would also be Mach. Okay, let's move on. Okay. So now, different question. Interesting. Someone sent me this question that they buy. This is a question, I think, from the United States. One of our listeners who listens to the recording. You can buy semi-baked bread. So you've got a commercial a factory, and you go to a freezer shop, and you can take from the freezer a semi-baked bread, and on the instructions it says pop it in the oven for so much time, and then it's going to be very gishmak. So if it's not pas Yisrael, does that and now you the semi-baked bread, you pop it into your oven, does that now become pas Yisrael? That's the question. So here we have on the screen from Simon Kuf Yud Beis in Yedideh, the dinner of Pas Akum. It says the following: if a goy baked bread without it being involved in poking and stoking the oven, didn't even throw a piece of wood into the fire, even if the bread has become a little bit crusty, still if it goes now and pokes the fire, so long as the bread still needs the oven and is going to be improving as a result by staying in the oven, so the intervention of the Yid is going to make it into Pas Yisrael. So again, it's very, very clear. Semi-baked bread, it's not, and it's got still needs the benefit of the oven, then that would be Pas Yisrael. Then we have the second part. Yesh Mishoim. Even if the bread was taken out from the oven and you pop it back, a Yid pops it back and it becomes better, it's fully edible, but it becomes better by putting it in the oven. That's also good enough to make it Pas Yisrael. Now that's actually the question which the fellow asked was, sometimes it says it's semi-baked, and sometimes it's fully baked, but you will make it gishmaka by putting it in by hot, etc. Does heating it up, making it gishmaka, also make it into Pas Yisrael? So the second opinion says even making gishmaka is also enough to make Pas Yisrael. Now, can we rely on that second opinion? So here in the Kaf HaChaim, he quotes from the Kiddush that when we have the Shulchan Aruch said a plain halacha, which says only if the oven is going to make it better, as in it's still not totally finished. Then he says a yesh mishoimer, even it's just making a more gishmak. When the Shulchan Aruch says basically it's not okay, and then it says yesh mishoimer, that it is okay, one should be machmir that it's not okay, even if there's a hefsed meruba involved. He gives a reference, listen to Chassidus, but at any rate, so So I would not go for the second opinion. That is, that if the rolls are totally edible, just going to become bishmaka, to pop them in the oven, that would not be enough. But if it's semi-baked, and so it's not fully edible, and you now pop it in the oven, that would be called a bishul Yisrael. Okay, now the next thing should be very interesting. So I was in a conversation before Tisha B'Av, on Tisha B'Av, about is it that it says in Shulchan Aruch, there's a siman in Shulchan Aruch, I think it's Tov Kuf Samach, about Zeichel Churban. And it mentions there about a woman would miss out one of her items of jewelry. So that she has a complement of jewelry, and she'll miss out one item, Zeichel Churban. So the woman who's corresponding with me was asking, is that the reason why a kala does not wear jewelry for a chuppah? I see these are totally separate things, because there you're talking about we're missing out one item. He's not wearing jewelry at all. But, so therefore, I was intrigued. I didn't find too much. But what we have on the screen here, like this I found from the Sefer Minhag Yisrael Torah, and refers us to the Sefer Avodas Yisrael, which is the Koshnitzer Maggid, who was a colleague of the Alter Rebbe. Brilliant Sefer. He was a brilliant person. He had a reputation of being Baki in 600 Sifrei Kabbalah. Right, so now he talks here, this in Parshas, I think Parshas Achrei. No. It's in Parshas Hazinu, V'zes HaBrocha, somewhere around there, and that's in the topic of Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur comes together with Parshas Hazinu. So he says the following. The Kohen Gadol wears 8 garments. The Kohen Hedyot wears 4 garments. What are the 4? The ksoines, the tunic. Michlasayim is the briefs. Mitznefes is a turban and avnet. The Kohen Gadol wears another 4. The choshen is the breastplate, and the ephod, which is the apron of sorts. Me'il, some kind of cape, but sits on the headplate, which we discussed earlier. So he writes the following. The Kohen Hedyot is not able to be mamtik dinim. He's not able to sweeten severity as much, and that's why he could only wear the white clothes, which are chesed, relate to chesed. The Kohen Gadol was able to also wear the other clothes, which also include gold. As well, let's look at those 4. The choshen has got gold. The ephod has got gold braided in. The me'il has got the bells, which are made of gold. And then the tzitz is made of gold. So the other 4 are the big dezor. So the Kohen Gadol has the ability to also be mamtik dinim and to take gold, which could also be causing trouble, and make it into Kedusha. Now then he quotes Reb Shamshon of Astropol. Reb Shamshon of Astropol lived about 350 years ago. What he writes is absolutely phenomenal. It's like a brilliant. There's a piece which is some Haggadahs for Erev Pesach. It's just phenomenal in gematria, but it's like amazing stuff. Unfortunately, he was killed al Kiddush Hashem. In some pogrom, some Russia stuck up a spear up his body. So Shamshon Ostropol writes, he quotes a medrash, shulcho imchem, that because of your sins, your mother was banished. Now that's a pasuk. Now then, the medrash says, shulcho imchem ishtoir amchatz. And what that means is the following, that after the Churban, imchem stands for, well, let's look up here, stands for avneit, michnosayim, chsoines, and michnosayim. So imchem is a remez for the 4 white garments of the Kohen, what the Kohen Hedyot wears. And because of the Churban, that was banished. And those 4 correspond to the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which he doesn't explain. What's left is amchatz, which stands for the ephod, me'il, choshen, and tzitz. And Noiterikoin, shekeneged oisis adni. So somehow the Shamshon Astropol connects these two sets, one corresponding to Shem Avaya, and the other one, which is more Chesed, and the other one corresponding to Shem Adni. And then the fact that the Kohen Gadol, although he is able to wear Big Day Zohov, and is even able to be Mamtik Dinim with the Zohov too, but when he enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he doesn't wear that the Big Day Zohov. He wears dafka. That's the whole business of the mikveh 5 times, because he has to change into Big Day Lovan when he goes to the Kodesh Kadoshim. So why does the Kohen Gadol, who is able to do a birur even with the gold, why does he, when he goes to Kodesh Kadoshim, why does he have to take them off and he goes to the Big Day Lovan? So he says, because that's the moment of yichud. Shas yichud, even the kala takes up her jewelry, as is customary at the chuppah to take off the kashorim of the Big Day HaKala, and as a preparation for yichud. So he has like a more spiritual reason, I think. I don't want to speculate too much, but he's saying that there is this minig of a kala not wearing the Big Day Zohov at the chuppah, which is similar to the Kohen Gadol who's going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that's such a moment of yichud. You don't want to have the distraction of the Zohar. Of course, you're going to ask, what about her gold ring? You know the answer. Okay, all right, I predicted that. Okay, right. So I guess because that is the vehicle which is creating the yichud, but a side gold would be a distraction from the thing. Okay, so that's just I just found it very interesting how he explains this minig of the Chakala not wearing jewelry. I looked for it. I remember somewhere in the Rishimas somewhere about the Chosen told not to wear cufflinks, because there was a word in Yiddish. Oh, and I remember now, zaponkis or something like zaponsis, to take them off. I didn't manage to find it today. So we have that minig of the Chosen not wearing gold, and I guess it's the same thing for the Kal. Okay, we had a discussion about not having meat during the 9 days. So someone sent me another source, and because he says the following: Minadin, you're not allowed to have a haircut during this week of the 9 days. Therefore, there's to remind you, there's also this minig of not having meat and wine, which are creative simcha. Even though an oval, is allowed to have meat and wine, so it's somehow like, in order to remind people that this is a state of mourning, not to have a haircut and not to wash clothes. Therefore, just as a reminder, that's what this Sefer Mata Yehuda lived about 300 years ago. So he's quoted as saying this. Okay, let's move on. So now I'm coming back also to the business of taking the broken glass from a chuppah and making it into an ornament, etc. Heard of how do you say, picture frames, the chasana. You're mentioning about the minig of the time based on Midrash, the silver headgear. You're talking about Irshal Zohov, and that was like a golden head plate made of Yerushalayim. Yeah. Okay, so here you have someone sent me, one of our listeners, listened to the recording, sent me an article. So this is about this broken glass business. Is it okay to make a piece of art from the broken glass? So the first quote is from Rav Nebenzahl. Here's the Rov of the Iratika. Actually, was in his house once. A very, very nice person, and he took the view that it's not okay. I think it's not okay because the breaking of the glass should be something painful, not to be making a profit out of it. Reb Meir Sander, who I don't know, says he doesn't see a problem with it. Another rabbi says he doesn't see a problem with it. Rav Schlesinger says he thinks it's okay, and Rav Duner from Bnei Brak also says it's okay. Then he goes further. someone put this question to someone, Rav Gamliel Rabinovitz, who writes many articles. Is it okay to take the pieces from the broken dish at the Tanoim or the broken glass and make from them a piece of artwork? And he says, it says in Poskim, the reason for breaking the cup at the chuppah, or breaking there are reasons given for it, but it doesn't say anywhere that it's Osa B'Hanoah. But okay. Then he brings from a sefer called Keser Shem Tov. Now, this Keser Shem Tov was actually, I think he lived in London. His name was Solomon Gagwin, and he writes the Minhogei Hasfardim of London ve Amsterdam. In the Rebbe's Haggadah, he's mentioned several times. So this Keser Shem Tov writes that there was a minhag in Eretz Yisrael to bury or to hide the broken pieces of glass, or they would dispose of them totally. And he writes there, he heard from the elder people of Shalim, there was a kind of belief that there are people who are into witchcraft who could manipulate the nerves of the chosen. They shouldn't be able to have contact with this color, and they would, by taking an item of the broken glass, they would be able to do this. And therefore, as soon as they broke the glass, they would take the pieces and bury them, that they shouldn't be accessible to these sorcerers. He says another minhag of putting coins, golden coins, in the pockets or in the shoes of the chosn, which I saw this mentioned somewhere. I've never seen it done. At any rate, so they shouldn't be subject to the sorcerers. So you see that there was this minhag of gathering the pieces and throwing them away, and they shouldn't use them for anything. So he says that nowadays, so he concludes, nowadays that people are not concerned. That's a stroll. We don't see the influence of this sorcery, etc. And therefore, he says that that isn't such a worry. He finishes off. He does conclude to avoid doing this. So I'm just seeing here a whole range of rabbonim back and forth. Whether and what's interesting, I mentioned I think last week. I think we should be looking more at this question, who is the ones who are into it, is more like, should we say, Mizrahi, that type of community. And these are rabbonim from those, some of these rabbonim from that community, and they're also having reservations about it. Okay, so you can see there's the spectrum there. Some say pro, and some say it's not a problem. Some say that it's not appropriate. Okay. One last thing which I want to share with you, and I want to just say something that the Rebbe once said by Fabrengen. He was talking about a Rashi, and he said that he had a question on the Rashi. Although several years ago I discussed this Rashi, and I gave an explanation for this Rashi. So he says, but I reserve the right, like someone else can ask questions on what I've said, I can also challenge what I've said. So I want to challenge what I've said about the Shalom Aleichem. So if it's a couple of weeks ago, we had this discussion about whether women at home should be saying Shalom Aleichem together with the menfolk when they come home from a shul. So what you have in front of you is, I just came to my attention this week. This is from the Siddur Shalom. So just to fill you in, there's two editions of the Siddur Shalom which preceded the Alter Rebbe, both printed in Amsterdam. The first one was printed in Ayin Tov Ayin Zayin. That's just over 300 years ago. The second one was printed in Tov Kuf Beis. There are very significant changes between one and the other. One of the changes is that in the first Siddur Shalom, I couldn't even find Shalom Aleichem, never mind the instructions. In the second Siddur Shalom, we have this instruction. Now that point is very significant, because you say Siddur Shalom with awe and respect, but when you see that it's not there in the first print, it's there in the second print, so you know this is not from the Shalom. This is from the printer, who, all right, generously added more information, which the Shalom didn't say. So, all right. So that he has here in the Siddur Shalot, the second print. V'zohi hatfilo sheyoimru kol ish v'isho v'bayis acha yetzias beis hakneses. This is a tefillah which is recommended for every man and woman at home after coming out of Shul. So this is printed in Tofkov base in Amsterdam. Just now we look lower down on the left. We have here from the Alter Rebbe Siddur, the one which is Tofkov Samach base, Tzachik Samach Gimel, some 60 odd years later, when the Alter Rebbe publishes his Siddur, he definitely had this Shalosh Siddur, no question about this. And he had this Shalosh Siddur, and he changes the wording, and he says, so it changes very much. That the instructions in the earlier edition is when they come back. And you know what? In all fairness, why should only the men be able to say Shalom Aleichem to the Malachim? Why should the women not say Shalom Aleichem to the Malachim? Why not? So that's what the Siddur Shalom is saying. And yet, the Alter Rebbe took that out, and he says, no, it's got to do with the one who's been coming home from Shul, and he's been accompanied by the Malachim, and then he's greeting them and bidding them farewell because they're going on to their next job, whatever it may be. So it's got to do with the one who's been accompanied. So is there a source for women also to say? So there you are. I didn't realize this last time we spoke about it. There is a source for it. What is our minhag? Primarily, it would be the one who comes from Shul. Someone else wants to join in. That's can't do any harm. Okay, right. So I think we've covered all the points, and I want to wish, if both the husband and wife, I doubt that in Amsterdam or whatever, they also had kinderlach, and they didn't. I don't think they. He's asking whether the husband and wife go to Shul. It doesn't read into the words. It doesn't say bevoy. It doesn't say the word bevoy in Beis HaKnesses. It says they should say it at home. It doesn't say after that. So it doesn't. You can pick a lot of holes in this sentence over here. But the Alter Rebbe is quite clear, at any rate. The one who comes home from Shul, when he comes home from Shul, says this. So, all right, I'll leave that with you. I wish you a wonderful week, and you should be in good health, and enjoy your holidays. Whether you're here or you're going to Romania or whatever it may be, enjoy your holidays. Kol tov.